Members, the next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 3732. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File number 3732, an act relating to state government, appropriating money for the Department of Employment and Economic Development.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Members, House File 3732 contains a series of budget and policy provisions from the Workforce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee, chaired by Representative Baker and me. Members, I don't think that either chair is going to claim that this is a groundbreaking bill, but at a time where we are in a tie in the House, I think we can feel pleased, and I think the chairs are hoping for your support for a bill that makes our programs work just a little bit better. You're going to hear from several members regarding provisions that they are supporting in the bill. I will just note that, as I say, there's a number of pieces here that will make our programs work better, having some reports come at some different frequency, repealing some programs that are not in use. I'll highlight two provisions in particular, one authored by Chair Baker, I suspect we'll talk a little more about, that will receive some recommendations, or have us receive recommendations from a subcommittee of the Governor's Workforce Development Board regarding direct appropriations for our consideration. Members, we debated a version of this earlier in the session. Things got a little contentious on the floor. We've made some changes to that, and the modified version is in this bill, and hope you support that. As well as a proposal that I've advanced to create an Office of Community Investment within DEED, again relating to grants modeled on the Office of Justice Programs and Department of Public Safety. So again, a number of pieces that are going to make our programs under our committee's jurisdiction, DEED and DLI, Explore Minnesota, work better in a number of pieces. We'll be happy to have conversations about that. I'm not sure if my co-chair is going to have comments, Mr. Speaker, and I know we'll have a few amendments to discuss. Thank you.
There are amendments at the desk. The Chief Clerk will report the amendment.
Zalesnikar moves to amend House File number 3732, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A12.
I recognize a member from St. Louis, Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, this House File 4110 is a fix to a bill that passed in 2024. Which was House File 5247. This bill gives an exemption to the meal and break times, and it's very specific. It defines it as if you are the only employee working at a time and there's services that you need to provide to protect life. We're talking about disability group homes. If you have any of them in your neighborhood, they're typically 4 people in a house, and there's 1 employee on. When the employee is the only person working, and you need to be available 24/7 for emergency response time. The new law that was passed to require uninterrupted duty-free. Duty-free means you're not going to be in the facility, you're not going to be listening for a call out, you're not going to be listening for a vulnerable adult hollering if they fell, you're not going to be there. You might be outside smoking, whatever you're doing. The problem is that's not reality. That's an idea. An idea of Amazon or some big business in a warehouse is not the same idea of how 24-hour care has been done in the entire time I ever worked in it. And while I haven't worked in the settings for 5 years, I can tell you that before this new meal and break law, Minnesota recognized the reality of 24-hour-a-day care 7 days a week, and staff somehow magically figured it out without a law. They took on-duty breaks while continuing to supervise vulnerable adults. These people are also in a situation with home care. You're one-on-one. You're taking people out shopping. But all of a sudden, you've been on the clock for 4 hours, so what are you going to do? Abandon your vulnerable adult person in Target or the grocery store and go in your car and take your 30-minute break? I mean, it is not matching reality. So this is a fix. We have DHS that does the licensing, which this body has something to do with. We also have a labor law, which this body has something to do with. And we also have resident safety, which this body has something to do with. So if we don't want to do anything, then this body has to increase funding for the sites that they want to have 2 staff for and change the entire model. And I don't see that happening. So my advice to the body would be to have a reasonable, common sense exception that exemption that has worked for decades. So members, I urge you to vote yes. This is a bipartisan. In fact, Senator Kupak is the author in the Senate. So I would hope that we would be able to pass a bipartisan bill. Thank you.
Further discussion. I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Johnson P.
Thank you, Speaker. First, I'd like to request a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Speaker. It's important to note that a brake law has been on the books since the late 1980s. And what we did in 25 is we made two important common sense improvements. First, we clarified what had long been too vague by defining a meal break as 30 minutes and a restroom break as 15. Second, we added a remedy when those breaks were denied. Those changes did one simple thing. They replaced the ambiguity with clarity, and they gave the law meaning. Sufficient and adequate, which was in the original bill, might sound good, but without definition or enforcement, they didn't protect anyone. By setting clear expectations and adding a remedy for the workers to ensure these basic rights are upheld is real and not theoretical. In committee, we heard concerns from some employer groups suggesting that these changes could hypothetically put patients and clients at risk, that workers would simply walk away from a client or somebody they were serving just to go take a break. That argument doesn't hold up. And as Representative Zalesnikar said, it ignores the reality of these professions, and frankly, it disrespects the workers themselves. These are people who have chosen careers centered in care and responsibility. Suggesting that they would ignore an emergency because of a break policy is not just unrealistic, it's insulting. Let's be clear about what this amendment does. It takes us backwards. It removes the clear standards and strips away the very enforcement that makes the law meaningful. Return us to undefined break periods with no real accountability. And that raises an important question. Before we clarified the law last year, were workers actually getting the time they needed to eat or even use the restroom during a shift? And this proposal suggests the answer is probably not. We often talk about workforce shortages, something we hear about in our committee a lot, especially in these caring areas like this. We talk about recruitment, training, retention, and yet we continue to overlook and disregard something that is fundamental: how we treat people on the job. If workers cannot count on the most basic of protections, why would we expect them to stay? This amendment undermines one of the basic workplace standards. The ability to take a meal break and use a restroom is not a luxury, it is a bare minimum. With that, I would request a no vote on this amendment. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Candy, Ohio, Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, again, I want to stand and support the Zalesnikar amendment today. This is not about basic rights. It's not about using the bathroom when you need to do it. That wasn't happening. What we tried to do the prior year to this was make some adjustments for the large warehouse-type settings, but we missed this slice of carve-out. We missed this part when it came to 24-hour care, 24-hour service. People are not being deprived of meals during this kind of care. But during the middle of the night, these kind of things are not hurting employees. They talk about clarity. This is about being able to be flexible to those kind of settings where we have 24-hour person care. This is an important one. Again, it's got bipartisan support, not only in the House here, but it also passed one of the committees unanimously here. But it got to our committee and it died on a party vote. That's not how this should be working. Somebody gets a hold of it and they kill it right now. I guess that's how we're in it. I get it. It's what we do in a tie. But members, this is a very reasonable bill, very reasonable amendment that was talked about. I really hope you can support this very minor change, because this is going to help people in this industry a tremendous amount. So I hope you can support the A12 amendment. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the amendment, yes. And members, I think we just need to be clear here. We're talking about situations where, and I understand the appeal of this at first is to say, well, if there's an emergency going on, an employee, it would not be appropriate to take a break. The law allows there to not be a break in that situation. It simply says that there need to be remedies that are paid, which is at that point ends up being essentially double pay for that 15 minutes. That's all that it is. I want to correct my colleague, Representative Johnson, in what he said on one regard. He said that if this amendment were to pass, this would send these workers back to the way things were before 2025. It actually would remove break protections altogether. This would repeal the subdivisions that allow employees to have rest breaks or meal breaks in the first place. So what we passed in 2025 makes a lot of sense. It says instead of having an ambiguous standard, as Representative Johnson referenced, we're going to say there has to be this particular 15-minute break within the 4-hour period of time. If there's not an opportunity to do that, to provide that break for a given employee, a given worker, because of emergency, because they're providing one-on-one care for somebody, they can't take that break. At that point, if there's that much of a need, then no requirement to take the break. The employee gets paid a little bit extra for that time when they really should, like any other worker, be able to use the restroom, be able to get a little bit of food to take care of themselves. So if they can't do that, the remedy is in place, but hopefully they can. And we want to make sure is that there's some specific and concrete steps that are taken. So we want to vote, members, really would urge you to vote against the Zleznikar amendment. We want to make sure that these workers are not sent back to have no break at all, and instead the very reasonable setup that we established in 2025, let's preserve that. Please vote against this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any further discussion to the amendment? I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from St. Louis, Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I'll tell you that in the past, for decades, if you went to visit your mom or your grandma in a nursing home or an assisted living or a disability group home, people had breaks. They have breaks now. I think a lot of this issue of this bill, if you're applying it to health care, you have to realize we're coming out of COVID. So if there were employees that didn't get a break during COVID, I can tell you I didn't either, because we didn't have staff. This body had the National Guard went out to 2 nursing homes. That's it. We have over 300 nursing homes and more than 1,700 assisted livings. They went to 2. So all through COVID, which went on for months, which became years, there was no staff. So there was no ability. So having a law in healthcare right now for these type of settings, if that's the case, which I believe it is doesn't even make any sense. It means that there's a disconnect from reality and people that actually do the job every day. I don't know how many in here have actually ran 24-hour operations or worked as a nursing assistant or worked as a home health aide or worked in disability services. But I can tell you that people had, the past law was adequate time to eat. It didn't say a fixed 30-minute, uninterrupted is the word that's a problem. Uninterrupted means you're not going to be in that facility like it always was in the past. You can leave the facility. That doesn't even make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And most of these places have them work an 8-hour shift, not an 8.5-hour shift where you punch out for half an hour for lunch. They pay them 100% for 8 hours because they eat with the residents. That's the disconnect for everybody here. They eat with the residents. And yes, we all went to the bathroom. The issue with this law is it's prescriptive. You start at 6, your break time's at 10. That's not the reality when you're caring for vulnerable adults. It's not. So when you reside in the disability group home and you have to wait for care, don't be surprised. Or if you're visiting these settings, don't be surprised when you're waiting for care, because it's going to happen. And the conflict comes when the DHS law says residents who require 24/7 supervision, if you have behaviors, medical needs, cognitive impairment, that's what they all have for the most part. And I can see you're not paying any attention, so we should just go to the next bill. Well, great. I'm telling you this is a big problem, and turning it into that nobody cares about worker rights is quite insultive to somebody that actually did work in the field for 40 years. And there's others here too. I know Representative Hicks has. She was an author on the bill. I know she has too. There's others besides me that have been in this field. And I'm not, I'm retired, but I can tell you we have an aging population. We have tremendous amounts of disabled people to serve. And if you have a model that this body voted in different legislation to allow these centers to exist, and now you want to change the rules of the game, but you don't want to increase the funding for staffing. How many of you are going to do that? And take money from rob Peter to pay Paul? It's not going to happen. So then we have to use a little common sense. You all know there's one person on for every shift. You can do basic math to know it doesn't make sense. It creates liability issues. It puts the provider out of compliance with the laws that this whole body works with the Department of Human Services through our Health and Human Services bill. It's going to either increase costs, because we're going to have to do different things for the medical assistance rates, or we're going to reduce services, have closures because they're not going to be able to be in compliance. So members, choose wisely, because disabled people have one person primarily on all 3 shifts in these group homes. Vote yes.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, aye.
Bliss votes aye. Hussein.
Hussein, no.
Hussein votes no. Momani Hilsley. Perez Vega.
Here you go.
Collins.
Yeah. Vote no.
Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, no.
Perez Vega, no. Momani Hilsley.
Momani Hilsley, no.
Momani Hilsley votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment.
Tab key moves to amend House File number 3732, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A13.
I recognize a member from Scott, Representative Tapke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Before I get going, I'd like to request a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So this bill is to protect the airline industry here in Minnesota and all of our passengers that we have going through MSP and the airports throughout the state of Minnesota. So this spring, February, March, our TSA agents were required to work without pay for a full 6 weeks, plus uncertainty created through the federal government, a lot of things that were happening that were extremely negative toward the state of Minnesota in our communities. And so with this, we have a lot of folks that were purchasing airline tickets and not knowing if they're going to be able to get through security. And I want to thank our TSA agents and federal employees at MSP because they were extraordinary this year. I think they were asked to do things that they absolutely should not have been asked to do, which is to work without pay for an extended period of time, which put tremendous, tremendous stress on themselves and their families. And so what this bill would do would backstop, create a loan fund that would backstop bank loans to these families. So there's a big problem that when someone cannot pay their bills, cannot make their ends meet, and they are unable to function on a day-to-day basis, then they are also unable to get loans because they don't have any income at that time. And so what this would do is it would create a loan fund that banks would be able to tap into if someone defaults on their loan. And so it's $150,000 paid for through the state aviation fund. And this has a nexus with aviation to make sure that the airlines are part of this as well. And so that's how that fund is filled. And so what this would do is a really good thing to protect Minnesota workers. And so again, this is a really easy bill to vote for workers. It will take TSA workers and make sure that they are cared for through the state of Minnesota. So with that, I ask for a green vote, Mr. Chair.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, folks, we know this isn't a serious proposal. It was never vetted in any committee. There's no Senate companion. It's very clearly not a serious policy proposal. But thank you, Representative Tabke, for bringing this amendment. And thank you for asking for a roll call, because this bill, this amendment, demonstrates an extraordinarily serious problem, an ongoing problem that Minnesotans are facing. Democrats who hate Trump so much that they're willing to hurt Minnesotans as a result. Representative Tabke says that we need this to protect the airline industry in Minnesota. The people we're protecting the airline industry in Minnesota from are Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith. He says that that TSA agents were asked to do something they should not have been asked to do. They were asked to do that by Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith, who over and over and over and over again filibustered funding for these folks. Why? Because of something they didn't do, but something other people in their administration had done that Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith hated so much that they filibustered the pay of our airport workers over and over and over again. This amendment uses state money to pay for a problem entirely created by Democrats in Washington. Just like we don't regulate federal employees here, we don't pay federal employees either. But the reason we have to deal with this is because Minnesota Democrats are so opposed to Donald Trump, they hate him so much that they are willing to hurt Minnesotans in order to show how much they hate Donald Trump. It's a common theme we're seeing around here. Over and over again, Democrats voting to oppose funding for our students in a scholarship program that was signed by Donald Trump. Democrats dragging their feet on Medicaid conformity, risking billions of dollars in federal funding to the state of Minnesota to show how much they're fighting against Donald Trump. Now they want to charge state taxpayers to pay for Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith filibustering the funding for TSA agents over and over and over again. To show what? To show how much they oppose Donald Trump and his immigration policies. Well, our TSA agents at the airport, they don't enforce immigration policies. And in fact, the filibuster of Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith didn't do anything about the...
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Sorry, point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
What order of business might we be on?
We are on discussion for the amendment A13. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment is choosing to charge state taxpayers to pay the cost of Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith's desire to hurt Minnesotans to stick it to Donald Trump. So it's not a serious policy proposal. It's obviously not a serious policy proposal. The Democrat co-chair of the Workforce Committee didn't even bother to bring it up for a hearing. There's no Senate companion. The Democrat majority Senate not passing this bill, not even thinking about it. But it is very, very important that the people of Minnesota think long and hard about why this amendment is happening and why Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith voted over and over and over again to take money away from the airline industry in Minnesota, to put all of us at risk at the airport, to ask those people to do something as Representative Tabke correctly said, they should not have been asked to do, to work without pay. That was shameful. That was shameful. For Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith to hold these people hostage, to hold their pay hostage, just to stick it to Donald Trump. And I hope the people of Minnesota are paying attention to Democrats who are willing to hurt Minnesotans to stick it to the Trump administration. Because if you give them power in November, that's exactly what's coming the next 2 years. If Senator Klobuchar becomes Governor Klobuchar and she's just sticking it to Donald Trump like she is in Washington.
Point of order,
we're
Mr.
in for
Speaker.
a long 2 years.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
Mason Section 124, Paragraph 1, personalities not permitted in debate. Members must confine remarks to the question before the House and avoid personalities.
Mr. Speaker, point of
order.
order.
If we could.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, point of order. We've gone down this road before and passed with Representative Long. I'll refer my colleague to 124, Section 2. A member, in referring to another member, should avoid using the member's name rather than identifying the member by district, by seat, as the member who last spoke, or the describing the member in some other respectful manner. Masons only protects members of the legislature. You can say the name Donald Trump, Amy Klobuchar, any other name that you want. This only protects members who are part of the legislature. Your speaker, now mayor of St. Paul, ruled in my favor when this came up. So please don't make the trite mistake of being afraid to talk about somebody that is not a member of this legislature. It's very clear. It's right here. Your side has ruled on it in the past. Just let Representative Niska say whoever's name he wants, because Masons affords him the opportunity to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would request a ruling on this.
Advice, Mr. Speaker.
State your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not quite certain what that was about. My point of order is simply that we are on an amendment pertaining to what Representative Tabke has offered to the body. I do not see names of any elected officials or any such thing. I am not citing that names, I'm not asserting that names can't be mentioned. What I'm asserting is that we have rules here in the House and that they should be followed, and I hope that you would take my point, rule my point of order well taken.
Members, I'm going to remind the body that we're on the A13 amendment. Representative Niska, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And as the saying goes, a hit dog will holler. I understand not wanting the people of Minnesota to hear about the very serious problem that this amendment so well illustrates. It's not a serious policy proposal, but it does show Minnesotans exactly what they're dealing with Democrats in Washington and Democrats in St. Paul. Members vote no.
I recognize a member from Dakota, Representative Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not that often that you all get to come into my world. So whatever that just was, I'm going to ground us in reality. Oh, not a good look, friends. Okay, so let's go back to about a year ago when the Trump, because we get to say whatever name we want, the Trump administration dissolved the collective bargaining agreement of our TSA. He walked that back because that was real dumb. And then fast forward to the fall in October when we had a government shutdown and our TSA workers didn't get paid because they're under DHS. And they went weeks and weeks and weeks without getting paid. I was at the airport, and I talked to them. And they kept smiling, they kept doing their job, and they kept keeping me safe, and they kept keeping you safe, all without getting paid. And I would ask in the various stations that I would go through, because Minneapolis, St. Paul, it's big, there's a lot, so I'd ask Des Moines, and I'd ask Flint, Michigan, like, how are you all doing? And for the most part, they were okay. And I kept asking as it kept going on and on and on, what do you need? And the biggest need they had was gas cards so that they could keep coming to work to not get paid, but keep our country running, keep our commerce going, all without getting paid, because the Trump administration and Speaker Johnson in the House, they, as you may well know, hold the trifecta there. And so they've been using our TSA workers as political pawns this entire year. I was out at the Minneapolis airport when our TSA workers, because there were some nonprofits that put together food boxes that they could pick up at the end of their shift. Nowhere would anybody think that they would be put in a position with a federal job to have to pick up boxes of food at the end of the shift and carry it through an airport for everybody to see that you needed a box of food. And so if you think it's so strange that we're criticizing the Trump administration and the Republicans in Washington for putting our federal workers, and not just any federal workers, the federal workers that keep us safe, because you may recall why TSA came into being, 9/11, when we realized we needed to protect our airline workers and our families and our business people when they were traveling. And so this is a really, really ugly look when you're trying to say our TSA workers, born out of 9/11, keeping us safe for 25 years, and then having to work month after month after month without a paycheck. This amendment, quite frankly, is not enough, but it's better than what they've gotten. And so remember, they've had their CBA dissolved. They've been through 2 government shutdowns where Republicans voted not to pay workers. So whatever that was, remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about workers and the fact that the Republicans in Washington and this corrupt, cruel, and chaotic Trump administration won't even pay its federal workers. So I want to thank Representative Tabke for bringing this amendment forward. If you want to talk about shame, shame on you for saying it's okay for us not to pay our workers, the people that keep us safe. So we can talk about shame all day long. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you for speaking from your personal experience, Representative Berg. It's hard to hear, Representative Niska. I feel like you saying this is not serious, bringing a procedure, it's sort of your go-to. But I have not seen you bring a bill to help or support our federal workers who have been impacted, profoundly impacted.
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
I rise to ask the representative a question. Clarified?
You can't do that.
It's in Masons. I'll find it and I'll come back. It's
okay,
in Masons.
You do that. Wonderful. Thank you. Representative Greenman.
Whatever that was. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our federal workers have been profoundly impacted by this out-of-control Trump regime. And when we have the power and the ability to support them here in Minnesota, we should do that. Bring your ideas. Thank you, Representative Tapke, for having an idea about how to support these TSA agents who, as Representative Berg said, have been held hostage to a federal government that has sent secret police into our communities. And because of that, there is hesitation to fund an administration and that kind of secret police that has been violating our rights. But this is not the only agency. We have seen, we saw last year, DOGE, and we had ideas in the legislature about how to protect the federal workers who were being impacted by the profound and very disrespectful cuts. I think it was 300,000 nationally, but 18,000 here in Minnesota, members in all of our districts. We have these workers, VA workers, USAID workers, USDA workers, and we worked, and Representative Johnson had a bill to extend unemployment benefits to them. And you wouldn't do it with us. Now Representative Tapke has a bill to help TSA agents, and what we hear, not only do we not hear any engagement on the issue, you can say it's not serious 14 times, but you actually have to talk about the bill, maybe. But we also haven't heard any of your ideas. But here's the deal, and I also heard a lot of speaking to Minnesota. Minnesotans have been paying attention. They have been paying attention the last set of months. And they believe their eyes. They actually have seen what it looks like to have masked, armed secret police in our neighborhoods. And that's what we're talking about here, because that's why the Democrats that you mentioned weren't willing to continue funding ICE. We have seen the way that they have been that federal workers have been devastated. And you know who's seen that too? The Minnesotans who live next to them and their neighbors. So please do not disrespect the Minnesotans by acting like they are not believing their eyes or paying attention. They know what it looks like to stand up for the Constitution, for your First Amendment, your Second Amendment, your Fourth Amendment, your 10th Amendment. And you can giggle and smile, but we all know, and we've been watching this together. So thank you, Representative Tapke. It is our job here in the state to stand up for the rights and freedoms of our people, of Minnesotans, and that's what this bill is doing. So we hope you join us, or at least bring your own ideas.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to set the record straight briefly. There was a comment that Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith had been holding this up over and over and over again, but they, in fact, voted, as did the U.S. Senate, on March 27th to fund TSA. And if you want to blame anybody, you should blame Representatives Emmer, Fishback, Stauber, and Finstead for the 5 weeks when they had the bill in their possession. The U.S. Senate had voted it out to fund TSA, and they chose not to because they were engaged in partisan fighting among themselves, trying to get to the point where they wanted to demand more from the bipartisan deal that had come from the U.S. Senate. So for 5 weeks, we saw 480 TSA workers quit in that time. We saw some airports with 40% absenteeism. So if you're going to blame anybody, point your blame at Representatives Emmer, Fishback, Stauber, and Finstead, who for 5 weeks sat on a bill that would have funded TSA, but this bill in particular, to anybody who wants to help TSA, is a very straightforward bill that would help these workers who are out of work because for 5 weeks, Representatives Emmer, Fishback, Stauber, and Finstead refused to fund TSA. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Long, I realize she's not your member of Congress, but I'll stand here to tell you it is Representative Michelle Fishbach. That's how you say her name. She is the last statewide Republican official here in Minnesota, and we're going to give her the honor of her name being said as it should be. But with that, let's also talk about hostage taking and what the House DFL did in January and early February of last year. So if we want to remember 7 months ago, Representative Greenman, let's talk about 15 months ago.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of order.
Mason's 101. This is taking us pretty far afield from the debate at hand.
Members, I'd like to remind you that we're on the A13 amendment. If you would please confine your remarks to that amendment. Thank you. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's really important because there are segments of our federal government that remain unfunded because of the intransigence, which appears to be a recurring theme, the intransigence of Democrats from Minnesota. Whether it's on the federal level, the state level, it's quite clear that we don't want to adhere to the law. We don't want to ensure that our communities are safe. We don't want to ensure that, as an example, we're funding TSA. These have all been the questions of the last few months. And frankly, if we want to look back to what it was like 15 months ago, you had that duty to show up, to be in this body when we organized. There's a date to be here, and every single member on the other side of the aisle did not show up to work on that day.
Point of order.
State your point of order.
I have 2 points of order. One of them is under Mason's 104 about motives. We've already heard that, but the main one is Section 101, debate limited to the questions before the House. And Mr. Speaker, you can see why we have this rule in Masons. It's because we can just fire back and we can keep going all night on these topics that have nothing to do with the matter before the House. So I would ask the Speaker to please rule that Representative Schultz is out of order, and let's get back to discussing the bill.
Members, I'm going to remind you we're on the A13 amendment. Please confine your remarks to that amendment. Representative Schultz, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. And I'm really curious as to whether or not this is needed given what has most recently transpired in Washington. Certainly, I understand the concerns that Representative Tabke would bring when his party has been so intransigent in Washington and when TSA has went unfunded from the actions of United States senators representing Minnesota like Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar do. I understand that, Mr. Speaker. So I appreciate that he brought an idea to be considered, Mr. Speaker. But if we avoided the intransigence that we see from Democrats here in Minnesota, this wouldn't be an issue. It wouldn't be an issue at all. And so, Mr. Speaker, as we look forward, let's hope that the members who might be considering running for, federal office, that they would vote, Mr. Speaker, to fund TSA and all of the Department of Homeland Security if elected.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Finke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank Representative Schultz for the name correction. I think that's very important and dignified, and I'm not kidding. I just want to say I really appreciate our TSA people. I don't really know what we're doing on the floor right now, but I do know we're talking about TSA and those who work at our airports. It seems like a pretty hard job. When they deal with a lot of cranky people, we all know what it's like to work with cranky people. And they do their job every day, paid or not. It's a job. It's a job. We show up, we do our jobs, we get paid, we get health care. They show up every day, they do their jobs, and they're not getting paid. They're not getting paid for the work that they're doing, or they weren't. And that is wrong. I think it's wrong to work without compensation. I appreciate Representative Tabke for what, at the end of the day, is not that controversial a concept. You may not like it, and I think that's fine. And voting no, I think, is fine. But I don't think that we need to pretend like somehow we are reorienting the debate around what is good and what the body should be doing. The body should be talking about what is best for the people of Minnesota. All this other nonsense, I don't know. I would like to go home tonight. I'm not here to scold. I love a good speech too. But what was going on over there earlier on this one did seem to me to be a problem that I had to address. So anyways, TSA is great, I think. And let's talk about the bill.
I recognize the member from Crow. I recognize the member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to agree with Representative Finke. I think the TSA folks do such a fabulous job. And I have one thing to say to the TSA good people at the airport. May the 4th be with you.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm kind of sad for this body right now. I feel like we've really lost our way on actually debating policy, and instead we just want to kind of poke and pick at each other. We should always be talking about the policy, not what somebody did 2 years ago or what president you hate today. What we need to talk about is policy. And what this policy does is it stands up for our neighbors. Just like when 3,000 masked secret agents started occupying our streets, our elected officials actually stood up to the response of their constituents, like good legislators do. And they stood up and said, we don't think that the way our citizens here are being treated, when our citizens are being removed from their vehicles for no reason, are being detained, kidnapped, murdered, maybe we should reevaluate the policies of that organization. That's right. So what happened was the legislators in Washington wanted to reevaluate how the ICE was working. So they took a pause. They were still funded, but TSA wasn't. And so what we do here in Minnesota, at least what we do here as DFLers, is we stand up for our neighbors. We have empathy. We have compassion for people. Last Sunday, 2 Sundays ago at church, we didn't get a homily, we got a list of activities of what to do in our communities to make it a better place. There was, quotes from the Bible, and then we talked about how do we make it a better place here. God calls us to action, not just to thoughts and prayers. And so standing up here and screaming about who you hate or who did what doesn't do anything to get us into action. Public policy is what we're supposed to be debating. Public policy. So I would really hope that maybe you guys could dig deep, find a little compassion, empathy, maybe put yourself in that TSA worker's shoes. And I know probably, hard labor is hard labor, and not a lot of us have done it. So think about what your family needs. Would you continue to go to a job that doesn't pay? Would you fly on an airline that doesn't have any TSA agents checking our shoes for bombs? Let's take a step back and think about how these policies affect people outside this room. Not what we can get for social media sound bites, but how the policy that we are debating right now affects the people of Minnesota. So I would hope that you could support this amendment to ensure that our hardworking TSA agents can pay the bills. This isn't charity, this isn't handout, this is a loan to make sure that they can pay the bills. Stand up for workers. Stand up for what's right. Stand up for empathy and compassion. Vote green.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think it's important to set the record straight on a few things. I heard kind of some cognitive dissonance from the other side of the aisle. I heard a lot of things that I agree with about the great work of TSA agents. Thank you, Representative Finke, for, I agree wholeheartedly with probably like 85% of your speech. I agree with all of those across the aisle who said, shame on you who say it's okay to not pay your workers. Shame on you, Senator Smith. Shame on you, Senator Klobuchar, for voting over 20 times to filibuster the pay for our TSA agents that they expect to show up for work. I know maybe some folks here don't know how the U.S. Senate operates, but when a party has a trifecta in Washington, the minority in the Senate still can stop legislation from going forward with something called a filibuster. Senator Klobuchar uses that tool. Senator Smith uses that tool. And they use that tool to force our TSA agents to show up for work day after day after day after day without pay. They voted over 20 times to prevent debate from closing on bills that would have funded our TSA agents, to hold them hostage. So thank you, whoever said it's wrong to hold people hostage. Absolutely, it's wrong to hold people hostage. It was wrong. I think Representative Greenman said that this was an effort to hold them hostage to get at the quote, masked armed secret police. None of the TSA agents were the masked armed secret police that Representative Greenman was referring to. That apparently was the reason why Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith were filibustering over and over and over again so our TSA agents couldn't get paid. So let's be clear about what happened. Senator Klobuchar, Senator Smith told our TSA agents, you got to show up for work even though we are going to stand in the way, filibuster, keep talking as long as it takes so that you don't get paid. Not because of something you did, because of something someone else did. Because we want to reconsider what's happening somewhere else in the federal government. It didn't matter whether the CBA was dissolved or not. Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith could have just passed the funding, chosen not to hold our TSA agents hostage. So if we're going to do something serious about this, there are ways to do it. Not an amendment like this that hasn't been vetted. This isn't ready for prime time. But thank you, Representative Tabke, for bringing this bill so Minnesotans can be reminded about the shameful way that Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith forced our TSA workers to show up over and over and over again without pay because they insisted on filibustering that pay. Members, vote no.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Scott, Representative Tabke.
Thank you, I think, Mr. Speaker. Usually, like, folks get up here and say thanks for the debate and all that stuff. I almost cursed for the first time on the floor. But this is a bill that came from an article that was in the Star Tribune. I expected to have at least a little discussion about the content of the bill and what this amendment would actually have happen for Minnesotans. And so I didn't really give enough preface, maybe. Maybe that was my fault, and so I apologize for that. But this came out from a end of March article in Star Tribune where Vincent Longo said that he has spent hours and hours screening thousands of passengers and bags over the past 6 weeks at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, and he hasn't been paid a penny. The same, yet Longo, who has worked for the TSA for the past 23 years, keeps showing up for work. The same can be said for most of the rest of local TSA workforce who, despite not getting a paycheck since February 14th due to the partial government shutdown, are keeping lines moving during the heavy spring break travel period. He said, "We want to keep the American people flying. We look for bombs and bags and firearms and knives and other prohibited items. I like my job. I know how important it is." What I'm attempting to do here, and I hope that the majority of this body will also attempt to do here, is as transportation chair, I want to make sure that transportation continues to work in Minnesota. We have a federal government that is chaotic, and as opposed to this debate where I didn't blame anyone for that chaos. There's a lot of projection going on today, and I want to make sure that we understand that this is about workers. This is about Minnesotans. We have 750 TSA workers here in the state of Minnesota that went over a month and a half without getting paid this spring. The deal that has been struck in Washington, D.C. right now only funds TSA through September 30th, the heart of election season this fall. And I can imagine, and it doesn't take much for everybody in this room to imagine, that there will be more chaos more shenanigans, more issues that come up this fall. And what this will do, if we pass this today, is give TSA workers the opportunity to get loans so that if and when they are not getting paid, they will be able to maintain their lives. They will be able to pay their rent. They will be able to pay their bills. They won't fall onto social services programs because they will be able to have the money they need to live their lives. And so that's what this will do. It's not a new mechanism. It is not a new thing that has happened. It's happened time and time again in the state of Minnesota. We do this for farmers. We do this for we do this for Iron Range workers. We do this time and time again, and this has happened many times before. And we can do this for TSA workers. This is something that has come about recently, so you're absolutely right that this hadn't gone through the process, but it is something that has been done many times and should be done again to make sure that these workers that we all need are able to maintain their job and move forward. So I ask everyone here for a green vote on this amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, no.
Bliss votes no. Hussein.
Aye.
Say it again.
Hussein.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momani Hilsley.
Momani Hilsley, aye.
Momani Hilsley votes aye. Perez Vega. Perez Vega.
The clerk will call the roll. There being 66 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The chief clerk will report the amendment.
Frazier moves to amend House File Number 3732, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A15.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a pretty straightforward amendment. Don't have to explain much about the reason why we're bringing this amendment, but this amendment would create a business release program in the Department of Deed. It would establish a $100 million account that would be provided to businesses that were impacted by federal enforcement activity and the response to that activity from between December 2025 and February of 2026. And the grants or loans would be determined to be necessary if the business would need them to be able to continue to operate. We all know what happened here in our state. We all know that many of the businesses around the state decided to take care of their workers when they needed to. Those businesses, I know in some of the debates that we've had, the question has been, well, those businesses should have planned and had a reserve. What I can say and what we know is that those businesses used any reserves that they had to help take care of the workers in the communities that were being impacted by these federal enforcement activities. What we know is that those businesses are part of the tapestry of those communities, and that for many of them, if we don't take any action this session, we will lose those businesses. We will lose jobs. We will lose our favorite spot that maybe we like to get a burger at, or a favorite ethnic meal that we enjoyed. We will lose community members because they will have to leave if they cannot maintain their business. So I am asking members to add this amendment onto our workforce bill, allow Chair Pinto and other members of the conference committee to go and negotiate this out with the Senate. But I'm asking us to give these businesses an opportunity to survive. And I would ask for a roll call on this, Speaker.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Frazier.
Thank you very much. And with that, members, I would enjoy a conversation about this amendment.
I recognize a member from Candy, Ohio, Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Frazier, Chair Frazier. Again, we've had this conversation before. I am not denying that there was a lot of unrest and Metro Surge was a real thing across the whole state of Minnesota. A lot of things I'm not proud of. but also what my commitment to you was from day one is if you want to talk about any kind of relief, it has to come with long-term and long-lasting relief to our businesses, like removing the small employers from paid family medical leave. That is a critical item to even have a conversation because that was so, in my opinion, overdone in 23 and 24 to have their voices heard, to have their request to have those choices to not participate in paid family medical leave. Right now we're hearing all kinds of stories from them in the first quarter of this new program that has rolled out that is causing serious worker shortages in a lot of places in Minnesota. So I'm going to certainly suggest this is a no vote because you didn't come with any kind of ideas that folks are looking for. So bring your ideas, and I've asked you to bring the ideas, and it's not here except just keep asking for the same thing from a different fund. You know, this looks a lot like the Promise Act that was done 3 years ago. A lot of the same language, same number, $100 million, going to small businesses under a certain point, and yet we are 3 years into the Promise Act, and today there's $70 million sitting with the NDCs that hasn't been allocated yet to businesses at this point. That's a problem. The state of Minnesota does not do grants very well. We don't hand out money with good guardrails. We are not in the business to doing that. So I don't deny that we had some issues, but hearing, you know, these businesses use their reserves during Metro Surge, you bet they did. And we do that when weather comes around. We do that during certain kind of events that we can't prevent. But also, the state legislature in 23-24 took those reserves away with more mandates on businesses. We are making it harder and harder to do business in Minnesota. So for us to legitimately think about doing any kind of grant options at this point that even revolve around the same kind of rules as the Promise Act, and we're seeing real cracks in the armor there for Promise Act, this is something that we should just absolutely shut down right away. The governor asked for $10 million on forgivable loans. This is nothing like what he wants to do. I'm not certain why this one is so different than what the governor wants. But members, we have to start getting serious about our businesses in Minnesota that want to remain here, that want to be able to get through the tough days and the tough weeks, the tough seasons. We never know what's coming. That's what business owners do. We risk everything we have. We're gamblers. We'll take on this risk. That's what we do. Sometimes we're good at it, and sometimes we go broke. But I understand what you're trying to do. I respect that. But why didn't we sit down and get serious about the kind of relief? We heard bills in our committee. Chair Robbins brought the small business exemption, 15 and under. Members, that would have been a really good starting place to get serious about at least recognizing the smallest of our companies are not set up like the other companies are, the bigger companies. In fact, right now, today, if you look at the stats from the Department of Economic Development, the folks that are using paid family medical leave right now are with companies of 200 or more employees. That's almost 70% of the applications that are coming in and getting approved are with the companies that already probably had a really good program that were big enough to have their own short-term disability program. So who's underwriting it? It's the small businesses. The ones who are not using it today, the ones who are still head down, working hard, trying to get through the next day. I just sent in $1,521 at the end of April for my little companies for my portion of paid family medical leave. That's $1,500. I know it doesn't matter much to Greg Davids or Chris Rudzinski. I mean, come on. But it's a lot of money. And I wasn't planning on it. I didn't know how much it really was going to be. But with my other companies and these other little businesses, that adds up, folks. It adds up. So it's real money. Chair Frazier, I wish We could have done this better. And you know what? We're not done yet. We're not done with session. Let's keep working on something. Members, this is a please, a red vote. We cannot support this right now. Our businesses are begging us, deeply begging us, don't make it harder in the state of Minnesota. This does nothing but hand out money. It enables, we become enablers. We're hurting our businesses more than helping them by just giving them money and walking away. That's not the way we should be doing this at all. Please vote no.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, as you know, the businesses in our state experienced a disaster, really a tsunami swept through in December, January, and February in these last few months. I was reflecting during the last debate, the debate on the prior amendment, about how we in this chamber can look at the same set of events from such a completely different perspective. And so we can debate and discuss what led to that disaster for those businesses, but I would hope we all could agree that when the restaurant on Main Street in your town or on one of the main streets in one of the cities we represent, when they experience a 90% loss of business, as many did, whatever the cause was of that, that is equivalent to when a fire sweeps through a town, when there's flooding, when there's a natural disaster. And what our state does when that happens is that we respond with kindness, we respond with support, we respond as Minnesotans. We do that because we take care of one another in this state. We do that because we recognize it's in our interest as a state to get those communities back up on their feet. We do well when that happens. And when we lose businesses because of that fire sweeping through or that flood, we know that that's going to hurt all of us for a long time to come. Members, whatever you want to think about what led to that loss of business in December, January, and February, I and a number of my DFL colleagues have some extremely strong feelings about that. Maybe some of our Republican colleagues do as well. Whatever the reason for that, though, those businesses experienced those losses. Members, we talked on that last amendment about the dangers and the bad aspects of hostage taking. We're accusing other people of taking hostages. When we have decided in this chamber to help out a community when there's been a fire or flood, we don't say, well, we would help you, but we need some policy changes relating to your business. We don't do that. That's not a thing that we do. How does that make any sense to tell a restaurant, to tell that small business on Main Street, sorry, we're not going to help you unless there's some policy change that happens? Talk about hostage taking. That is hostage taking. Members, as long as paid leave's been brought up, 70% of the leaves have been large businesses. It's interesting. I've heard a lot of concerns about the impact of paid leave on small businesses. Actually sounds like very often it's the leaves being taken by employees of large businesses. It's paid leave that allows those small businesses to compete for workers, to know that for the cost they're paying in, that those workers are able to know that if they have a baby in their family, if they get extremely sick, if a family member gets extremely sick, life happens. Workers are human beings. They have lives. Here's the thing, though. Whatever you think about paid leave, we can discuss that. That's an important topic. Don't hold businesses and communities hostage for whatever policy changes you want in that area or any other. This is a very fair proposal from Chair Frazier. He's worked on it a lot with Chair Zhang. It requires businesses show that they had a significant negative impact on the business as a result of the enforcement activity and the response thereto. And a significant portion of the funds would go to the Minnesota Initiative Foundations, recognizing this was not just in Minneapolis, St. Paul, certainly it was in the suburbs, and not just in the suburbs, it was in our small towns and in our rural communities and throughout our state. That tsunami that swept through, that impact was on all the businesses in our state, throughout our state, and we need to step up as we have in other cases. Members, can we possibly see that these businesses have suffered in the same way as the businesses that so often in this chamber that we've stepped up for, and that their workers have experienced that as well? Can we see the humanity in what they've put into their businesses? And can we see our own self-interest in supporting them and in enacting a program such as this? Thank you, Chair Frazier. Thank you, Chair Zhang, for your work on it. Members, we can have discussions about all sorts of other topics, but let's step up as we have so many other times and pass this business relief program. And please vote for this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I applaud the work of Chair Baker and Chair Pinto to find agreement during this session. And while this particular amendment is not one of those things, their work to try and find their way through these intense issues is commendable. So hats off to both of them. And I will just say, this kind of cuts back to the heart of the discussion that we will have these next 2 weeks, which is the policy decisions of the state of Minnesota from whichever generation, whether it was 2 years ago or whether it's from previous years, that have resulted in more folks who are not here with legal status residing in our state, and choices made by local units of government to adopt sanctuary policies for those folks, to make Minnesota more of a magnet for populations of foreign nationals across the world. And so I draw that contrast, realizing that HCMC has a huge deficit, and I draw that contrast, realizing that we don't have a money tree, and I draw that contrast now before us because this amendment, the A15 amendment, takes $100 million from Minnesota's Forward Fund. I believe that those dollars are being used for a beneficial purpose. It's to attract more great jobs for Minnesotans. And what this amendment does is it guts $100 million from that fund. I don't know the exact health of that fund, but I would take a gander and just a guess to say that there's probably not that much more money beyond $100 million. There's $120 million, according to Chair Baker, $120 million, and this amendment takes $100 million of that appropriation and provides it for this purpose that we're discussing this evening. And the reason that I want to mention that is because that fund is to attract great paying jobs for Minnesota. In fact, it is providing the funds from a state and local level to match with federal dollars to bring more manufacturing here, to bring more investment in Minnesota from more job creators to grow our economy. It specifically allows for matching funds for things like the CHIPS Act, passed while President Biden was in office, to hopefully bring more manufacturing here. So there are examples of how this is actually benefiting Minnesotans already. As an example, there is a project in Rosemount, and if I understand it correctly, not being an expert on it, the Minnesota Aerospace Complex at Umore Park is one of those beneficiaries. And if we're going to manufacture more here in Minnesota, if we're going to adopt more America First, Minnesota First policies that allow us to see growth, these are dollars that we shouldn't be raiding. These are consequential decisions that we're making right now. And I would argue to the entire body and to Minnesotans that our work would be far better done if we have collaboration to enforce federal law from the state level, from the local level, and if we're all working together to ensure that Americans are benefiting from our policies. We already know that that's not the case. So instead of something like this that is very reactionary, what we should be doing is we should be passing Representative Reimer's House File 16 to encourage and to ensure cooperation between law enforcement agencies to ensure that federal immigration law is enforced appropriately and effectively, which would mean that instances like Operation Metro Surge would never have had to happen. And for the future, that it doesn't have to happen in the future. And so, it's a conscious decision that we make tonight. So understand that this vote on this amendment strips $100 million from things that could result in additional investment in Minnesota. And it's also a reminder to us that our words matter, that the things that our elected officials say matter. So when we listened to Governor Walz, or we listened to the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul, or Keith Ellison, during the winter months, tell folks not to go to work, tell folks to, instead of going to work and spending money at restaurants and in community, telling those folks to either stay home, not go to school, not go to restaurants, not contribute to the economy, that's a self-inflicted choice made by Minnesota's leaders. And it has consequences. So our words, they have consequence. Our decisions, they have consequence. And if you're hearing anything from our side of the aisle, it's that the policy around generosity without accountability or compliance fails to work for taxpayers, for Minnesotans. And it's exactly why we must work together to ensure that situations like this never happen again. So to wrap this in a bow, the future of Minnesota is better off if we're talking about how we can drive additional investment in this state, rather than using money that's been appropriated to grow Minnesota's economy to pay for folks who didn't go to work because of the instructions that they were listening to from Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, and top elected Democrats in Minnesota. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Finke.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise today in support of the Fraser Amendment and to just add some color to the conversation that we're having, particularly the comments from Rep. Baker that opened the debate on the amendment. And the thing that's difficult for me when we say PFML, paid family medical leave, the cost burden of the program that we've done has to be offset against the financial support that's being asked for in this bill or amendment. And what we're really doing in that is we're setting up a situation where we're saying there is a group of small businesses and there is another group of small businesses, and in Minnesota we're going to pit them against each other. We are going to come forward with a scarcity model that says if you cannot afford to, if you cannot survive, the federal occupation that we had, well, the survival of your business is dependent upon the repeal of these programs that are quote unquote hurting the businesses that we want to survive. We are going to choose in that. It is an equation of which small businesses we think are worthy of having the support of our government. So there are businesses who exist and who pay for paid family medical leave. They may not want to. And then there are small businesses where 4 agents of the federal government came into a restaurant and sat down in that restaurant, and then they ordered food, so the server took their orders. That food was prepared by cooks who were working that day, and the federal agents ate that food and then arrested everyone that worked in that restaurant after they cooked their meal and served it to them. Now, that's not a decision that those people made that day when they went into work. They didn't go into work. They didn't stay home. They didn't know anything other than they went to work. They fed the very people who arrested them with the intention of deporting them. And then all of that staff from that restaurant was gone. So the question is that the Fraser Amendment is offering is, do we want to support that business? And I appreciate everything Representative Pinto said, except for the weather. This isn't like the weather, right? This is the federal government targeting a state violently with an expectation of thousands of deportations, which they achieved in the murder of 2 of our neighbors. But even if you set all of that aside, the businesses and the business owners went to work until they couldn't. I know a business owner who didn't go to work. I actually found this out through a parent who goes to one of the schools in my district, and they live in an apartment, but next to that apartment is an Airbnb, and 9 ICE agents moved into that Airbnb, and she said, "Hey, did you hear about the Airbnb?" The Airbnb, I'll just add, is it's down the alley from the Airbnb, so where I kind of drove by to scope this out. You know, they had like the decks, because it's like a multifamily housing kind of multiplex duplex. You could stand outside on the back decks and you could look down the alleyway to the entrance to the elementary school in the neighborhood, which they would do. People would observe, and the agents would be sitting out in the back watching people in the alley and what was happening at the elementary school. So somebody who actually lived on that alleyway was also a small business owner who stopped going in to work because he knew that there was 9 ICE agents living in the Airbnb at the end of his block. So I guess the question it becomes, does that man deserve to lose his business because we are not relitigating the paid family medical leave program? Is that really what we're going to say to our community members? That if you cannot repeal a program, a massive statewide program that has nothing to do with anything regarding what happened to these businesses, we're going to let it fail because you were afraid of something that was terrifying and you deserve to be afraid of. We had members of our community terrorized for 3 months, and to say that it is somehow the Democrats' fault that a mass occupation of the state of Minnesota recommended people to stay safe, recommended people to protect their children. There's never going to be a moment where we say something and the light turns on. I can get that, right? It is the moment in this country when I don't want to get in trouble. People do not deserve to be blamed for protecting their lives. They need help. It is our job to help the people of Minnesota. It does not matter where those people came from. It does not matter to me even why they're here or how they got here. But we know that these are parts of our community worth celebrating, worth protecting, and paid family medical leave has nothing to do with it. Finally, representatives said, instead of bringing something reactionary, we should bring something that's forward-looking. And I just want to say that we are going to be reacting to this for a long time. This is a generational trauma for the people who were affected by the occupation, by the Good family and the Preddy family, but also by the thousands and thousands of families who had deported family members. We have to react. We have to stop. We have to make it right. We have to react because of the deep wounds and trauma that was created by Donald Trump and his administration and a secret police of 3,500 people who came into our state, devastated our economy, but also more importantly, the humanity of our neighbors. So support the amendment.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate you bringing this amendment, Representative Frazier, but I have a lot of concerns about it. So, as you know, the Promise Act, which this is built upon, has a lot of problems with fraud, and we're still getting to the bottom of that. So to put $100 million into a program we know has fraud that we're having the OLA review right now, and we don't have it figured out, is stunning to me. So I looked at the amendment hoping that there would be a lot more guardrails, at least for this program. But there are not. So any eligible entity, you just have to have a primary business operation located in the state of Minnesota, at least 50% owned by a resident of the state, in good standing with the Secretary of State and the Department of Revenue, and be able to demonstrate a 20% decline in revenue in the period involved, and have a revenue annually of less than $3 million. The business does not actually have to be open. So for example, Quality Learning Center would qualify. Learning Center, yes, my colleagues are correcting me. And there's no required documentation. It says you have to demonstrate, but it doesn't say how. And then when you go to the fraud deterrent measures, it says that anyone suspected of fraud can be reported to the Commissioner of Deed and within 15 days, and then that gets reported to the BCA.
Point of parliamentary inquiry. Can you remind the body what amendment and what matter we are on? I believe that Representative Robbins is talking to the A14 amendment, but we are actually on the A15 amendment, which does not have anything to do with the Promise Act.
Thank you. I appreciate you pointing that out. You are absolutely right, and I'm sorry. So I will come back on the A14. Sorry, I just had the wrong note up, but thank you. You are correct. Thank you, ma'am.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will not tread the ground of what it means in this body to hold emergency funding hostage to long-term policy change. What I do want to talk about is what we're actually talking about here. Representative Schultz, you said this was about immigration policy. The president said it was a day of reckoning and retribution. And the day of reckoning and retribution wasn't about immigration, and it wasn't about public safety. And what did it look like? It looked like neighbors being abducted by armed masked men. It looked like black and brown Minnesotans, citizens, being asked to show their paper. It looked like a video of an ICE agent telling a peaceful constitutional observer, quote, "You raise your voice and I will erase your voice." How do we know it was retribution and a reckoning and retribution? Because the President of the United States told us. And when we think about that, what we are talking about here is how that impacted our local businesses, and they were on the front lines. When confronted with this lawless, out-of-control federal aggression, they were the local restaurants, the bakeries, the hardware stores, the coffee shops, the corner stores, the retail stores who stood up for the constitutional rights of their customers, of their workers, and their neighbors. It wasn't Target. It wasn't any of the big box stores. The people who stood up for their neighbors were the people who were their neighbors. And those are the businesses that we are talking about here. And they need a lifeline. And they need a lifeline, and I know that this is not just my community of South Minneapolis. I know that this is communities across the state, and I know, Chair Baker, how much you care about your community. What I would ask on this vote and with this policy is that we look at those businesses who, not only through no fault of their own, but how do you bake into your business plan a lawless federal occupation being used against you? I don't think you do, right? That's not even the weather. And so on this bill and on this amendment, let's do what we think is right for these businesses and do right by them, but know that this day of reckoning and retribution, we are all dealing with in our own communities. We can reject that. We don't have to buy that line, and we don't have to pretend that this was about anything other than the President of the United States trying to force policy change, investigate his political opposition, which we saw during this operation, commandeer our voter rolls, which they demanded as the price of leaving, and doing all of this under the barrel of a gun. 3,000 guns, actually. But that's not how it works in Minnesota. That's not how it works in this country. We, our people, our Minnesotans, forced the federal occupation into retreat. And now what we are saying is let's support these local businesses who did their job to protect their neighbors and their communities. This is an easy vote, yes.
I recognize a member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, there's a couple times tonight that I've found myself in agreement with Representative Finke. The first statement was, I want to go home. Definitely agree with that and feel that sentiment. But the second time was when the representative recognized what I think is a great metaphor, great analogy of the natural disaster, right? If there's a disaster, we're going to respond, we're going to help out our neighbors. But as Representative Finke correctly pointed out, this was not a natural disaster. This wasn't the weather. This was a conscientious decision on policy from multiple levels and multiple people. And that's acknowledged in the text of the amendment, lines 1.2 and 1.21. They have to demonstrate significant negative impact on the business from, here it is, federal enforcement activity. Now, I'm guessing that phrase, federal enforcement activity, was chosen for its legal effect rather than its rhetorical effect. And that's proper, that's how you should write bills. But what exactly is it that the feds are enforcing? Could it be the law? Federal immigration law? And we've heard tonight, again and again, we've heard references to how all of this actually began. It didn't begin with Donald Trump. It began with the choice to delegitimize that proper federal enforcement function. If it wasn't legitimate, if it was actually an invasion, if it was actually an occupation, if it was actually secret police, you could put that language in this amendment. You can't because it's not. That's just the rhetoric that you used to describe legitimate federal law enforcement, fulfilling their constitutional obligation, one of their enumerated powers, to enforce federal immigration law. We heard the likes of Ilhan Omar talk about abolishing ICE, saying, like many of you have tonight, that they're terrorizing communities. We saw Governor Walz call them and Trump Nazis, Gestapo, fascists. The effect of that rhetoric is to delegitimize the agency. Because you see, when the agency doesn't have any legitimacy, when it should be abolished, when it isn't actually a thing that has any moral or legitimate purpose, well then you justify doing whatever you want and whatever you can to, as Jacob Fry said, get it the F out of Minneapolis. And I know it's not lost on me that right now, as we speak, just across the street, prominently displayed in some of your offices, are signs that say that very same thing, F ICE. That's where this started, with the intentional delegitimization, let me pronounce today, of federal law enforcement. Now, what does that accomplish? Well, it accomplishes the premise for step 2, which is what Peggy Flanagan said: put your bodies on the line. That was a phrase that was repeated by Keith Ellison when he's out visiting the folks at a protest. Put your bodies on the line. I'm not aware of any legitimate protest activity that involves you physically putting yourself in some kind of danger. If you're engaged in an activity that puts yourself or others in danger, that's probably criminal. And we saw plenty of examples of that. We saw hotels and businesses vandalized. We saw people assaulted, not by ICE, but by the folks who you guys encouraged to put their bodies on the line. Meanwhile, mere 45 minutes away, where I come from, inside the circle, where we don't get to have an apartment here in town, you know what the day of reckoning looked like in my front lawn? Blue skies, birds chirping, kids laughing, bicycle bells ringing. My businesses didn't get burned down. They weren't adversely affected by federal enforcement. And by the way, I should have pointed this out earlier, right after that, the impact on business from federal enforcement activity and the response to that activity. Boy, yeah. There's the key, how people responded. Strangely enough, in my neck of the woods, where people overwhelmingly support Donald Trump and overwhelmingly support ICE, and where our law enforcement works hand in glove with federal enforcers and agencies, we didn't have any problems. Weird that. What could the difference be between those two situations? It's pretty obvious. But now you're asking me to go home to my constituents and tell them that we're sending them the bill for the bad decisions, the insightful rhetoric, the insurrectionist activity that was intentionally provoked by elected Democrats at every level. No, thank you.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. You know, it's amazing to me as tonight we've really spent a lot of time with federal employees, TSA, now ICE, and there's a lot going on. And I don't know if this is a serious amendment, if it's performative. You know, I thought when Representative Baker started this whole thing that we were going to have some comparison on ideas and maybe this would move, maybe it wouldn't. I didn't really know. And it's obviously gone down this path where, you know, you're going to blame, one side is going to blame the current president, the other side's going to blame some policies that were enacted at another time. And, you know, we go back and forth on this, and number one, it's not effective, but, you know, number two, the Minnesota Forward Fund is not a small business relief fund, Representative Frazier. It was a fund that was put in place to try to fill that gap for large technology, you know, getting large employers into the state. And I appreciate the fact that you want to provide some relief. But what we're trying to say on this side is that it's all the little things that we do. You know, you might say that paid medical family leave is the most important thing that we ever did. That's fine. You know, there's a lot of employers that actually, you know, already provided that and, you know, but got forced into now the employees have to pay a percentage of that into a fund that we don't necessarily know if it's going to be sustainable or not. But small businesses, if you want to help small businesses, they don't need a handout. They need a stable environment to compete. That's it. I mean, these are risk takers. They're people that are willing to put it on the line every day. I have a builder in my district. He's a labor supplier. And when, you know, in January, and he was a huge, huge Trump supporter, huge, over the top. And about 2 weeks into that, and, you know, my district had just as much ICE enforcement as maybe some of the others. And after about 2 weeks, he didn't have any employees. all of his guys were afraid to show up. And it wasn't because ICE was in the community, it was because of the rhetoric that was going around this. He's back in business now. They're safe, they're back there, they're slowly coming back. He doesn't want a handout. He wants a stable environment to conduct business. He reminded me that during COVID, his business was shut down. The governor of this state shut businesses down. He didn't shut down Target. I don't remember who brought up Target. But, yeah, thank you, Representative Greenman. People make decisions that they think are right at the time. And we can question the motives of the president or question the motives of the governor. But it doesn't change the fact that we have a job here to do. And I think what we're trying to say on this side is that if we want to help small businesses, and we do, and I believe that you guys do too, but lower property taxes, lower corporate taxes, lower small business taxes, create exemptions for large, broad benefit sets, enforce the rule of law, charge people when crime occurs. I mean, you go downtown Minneapolis, I work downtown Minneapolis, and I haven't been down there since COVID. And I go down every few weeks. Everything's gone. Everything's gone. The Bruegger's is gone, I just noticed. Bruegger's, it's gone. Everything's gone. There's nothing down there. There's nothing on the Skyways. There's no restaurants. The Brothers Deli is gone. Everything's gone. That didn't happen between January 25, January and March of 2025. It happened because of all of the layers that we put in. And that's all I think that we're trying to say, is that everything we do has an impact. And I just looked. 32% of small businesses today still report unfilled job openings. 32%. Small businesses want to grow. They want to thrive. They need an environment to do it. They don't need a handout to do it. Thank you, members.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Take two on the right amendment. Thank you. So I'm glad to see it's not on the Promise Fund. It's a good start, but the other language in the bill is identical. So back to where I was, people who qualify for this can use it. First, we went through who qualifies, who's eligible. And that was, you have a business operating in the state, 50% owned by a resident of the state of Minnesota, in good standing with the Secretary of State and the Department of Revenue, and able to show the decline in revenue over the period, and have an income of less than $3 million. Quality Learning Center fits all of those criteria. It doesn't say the business has to be currently open. So people who were in business, who are now closed, could qualify. The other thing that's really important to know is that rather than building it on the Promise Grant, which I'm glad they're not doing, they are giving the money to the Minneapolis Foundation, the St. Paul Foundation, and then those groups can make sub-grants to community development financial institutions and nonprofits, none of which are named, who will put the money out. And so Minneapolis and St. Paul Foundation get it by June 30th. Then they go through an RFP process to pick the community groups that will hand it out. And all of the money still has to be out the door by October 31st. That's a very tight deadline. So it makes me wonder, how are they going to really know the eligibility for all these groups? Because the fraud deterrent measures in place in this amendment are minimal. So if someone is suspected of fraud, they can report to the commissioner, and that will be sent to the BCA. Quote, here's the big fraud prevention measure. Each application form must display the following notice. Fraudulent applications will not be tolerated. Information from any suspected fraudulent application will be reported to state investigating authorities. There's no documentary requirements. You sign a form, it's attestation. I cannot believe that we are doing this all over again. We know how to prevent fraud after all this time, and it's no attestation. It's relying on documentation. And the other thing that's concerning is that it says grants and loans may not be used to refinance debt that existed before December 1st. But there's no mechanism for asking how they're going to prove they didn't use it for that. There's no mechanism for verifying that they're using it on the things that are allowable. So members, we're about to spend, if this goes on, a lot of money on a new program with no guardrails. And I just can't imagine that's what Minnesota taxpayers want us to do. We are trying to shore up guardrails in all these other areas and all these other programs. And we're currently investigating the Promise Act, which is a deed-run program that is full of loopholes, as the governor himself said. So why we would create a brand new program with no guardrails defies common sense. So I urge a no vote, and that future programs that are created must have robust guardrails, or we are just going to perpetuate the fraud problem in this state. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks everybody for the robust conversation. And I will say, Representative Robbins, you were on the wrong amendment first, but that initial amendment was to address and offer a branch to Chair Baker, who often talks about the Promise Act, and using that as a vehicle to address these businesses that have been harmed. So I didn't bring it today. I didn't call it amendment, because I do want to give Chair Baker the opportunity to bring a solution to this issue. And I do think we still have time to talk about that, and we still have the opportunity to work on that together. So I just wanted to make a note of that at the start. You know, listening to this conversation, I've heard none of us, not one single individual in this chamber should be proud of what our federal government did to our state. No one. No one. I've said this time and time again. They did pick the wrong state, because we didn't just lay down and roll over. We fought and advocated for our neighbors under our constitutional rights that is allowed in this country. Right now it is still allowed in this country to practice those constitutional rights, but no one should be proud of that. We've talked about that this was merely a policy issue. This was violation of Fourth Amendment rights. This was racial profiling. We have had courts say that independently and objectively. None of us should be proud of that. None of us should be defending those actions from our federal government. And when we've made this analogy to storms, we've never punished anyone or said, shame on you, you don't deserve relief because you took cover from a storm. Metro Surge was that storm. It was chaos, and people did what they needed to do to protect themselves. We've never punished anyone for doing that. But that's what I'm hearing today, is that that's what we should do now, is blame the victims. What I also hear is this is very much like the gun debates we have here. Many of my colleagues on the other side want to discuss every single thing, but not the thing that actually caused the harm. And that is, again, not a good thing for Minnesotans, for any Minnesotans. We have an opportunity, and I feel like I say this every time I stand up here. We have election certificates. We have the power to do something. People are asking us to do something to help them. We have the opportunity to do that. We should do that. We should give the relief to these businesses. Representative Schultz, you talked about investing. This would be an investment. This would be an investment in our small businesses that have been harmed. And these are small business all across this state. There are small businesses in your district that have applied for grants from foundations that are trying to do this work that the government should be doing. So your district is not exempt at all. And we should be doing something to help those individuals. It is an investment because we're saying keep those businesses in operation, keep those jobs accessible. That is what we're doing. That's what this would do here. If you want to talk about putting more safeguards in that, let's do that. Let's put this amendment on, allow the chairs to negotiate that in conference committee. We can do that. It's still time to have that conversation. A lot of political posturing, but I know the majority of you on that side, you know what happened in your communities, you know what happened to your small businesses, you understand the impact, and I do believe you want to do something. So at some point, we're going to have a real conversation and actually do the work that we were sent here to do, and that is to help out Minnesotans when there are tough times upon them. So with that, members, I urge you all for a green vote on this. Let's show all Minnesota that we can work together and we can help them out when we need it. Vote green.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, no.
Bliss votes no. Hussein.
Go ahead.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momonty Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
Momonty Hiltsley votes aye. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, yes.
Perez Vega votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The chief clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File number 3732.
Third reading. Discussion. I recognize the member from Meeker, Representative Gilman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. This bill misses the mark on what's important to the business community looking to grow their businesses in Minnesota's economy. Just this morning when I was at the local coffee shop in Cokato, Minnesota, I was talking to a business owner, and he shared with me that two huge businesses that he's been doing bids for years are now bringing their housing projects to another growth-friendly state. He sat there with his wife, and he's just dumbfounded. These two businesses have been very active and very involved in our state for years. And so when we do talk about mandates, and I do love hearing people talk about wanting to bring relief to businesses in Minnesota, that would be by bringing forth relief for these mandates. So I would have liked to see some fixes on mandates so employers can reinvest in their workers in operations, and that's why I'm a no on this bill. Thank you.
Further discussion. I recognize the member from Mower, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members. You know, we have seen a lot of discussion about all the different amendments, and there's been a lot of wild gesticulation about all sorts of things, but we're going to talk about, as much as we can talk about what's in the bill, which is a pretty slim bill and there's a lot of really good things there. And I know that Co-Chair Pinto and Co-Chair Baker have worked really hard to create a bill that is good for the for a non-budget year. But I want to talk about things that could have been. Frankly, things that should have been. Man, those helping verbs, they really change. When I taught English for a long time, we talked about helping verbs and how things can change the meaning, where I will do versus should do versus could do. These are things that we might have done, right? I mean, those are words that are important. These are things that we should have done. We could have done, but we didn't. The number one concern that my businesses have are being over-mandated, over-regulated. April 30th came and went with the first premiums due, and I had plenty of my businesses talk about all the money they had to spend on something that, frankly, many of them didn't ask for. We know that the majority of our businesses are job creators, are small job creators, and yet a policy that was created to protect our small businesses, our small job creators, to make sure that we uphold them, they're the ones subsidizing this massive government program. 67% of workers that are on leave are from employers that are from companies that are 20 or 200 or more. That's a big business. That means that our small businesses are subsidizing employees who are taking leave for big businesses. I heard so many things that people said during this debate. Let's keep jobs accessible, keep jobs operational. Trust me, my job creators would like that. My job creators want to keep it accessible and operational. And yet they have the question in their mind every day, can they make it after looking at another mandate, another tax, another regulation that's not operational or accessible? And it's not as if we came and just said, hey, let's repeal it. You may have heard that from some of the members on our side of the aisle, but you didn't hear it from me. Instead, you heard me ask for an exemption or an opt-in for our S-Corps. You heard from Representative Robbins for an opt-in for job creators who have 15 or fewer employees. You heard from Representative Bakeberg to just kind of modify seasonal employees. You heard from some of my other colleagues that would just modify and make more manageable the definition of family. We weren't asking for a repeal. We were asking for modifications that would make it more manageable. And all we heard from the other side of the aisle was, we're going to destabilize the program. It's going to become so unstable because of what did my fiscal note say? Of the less than 1% of all wages in the state of Minnesota had a chance to opt in. That's going to destabilize the program. Matter of fact, the fiscal note actually says on here that it is less likely to have a material impact on the net fund balance of the program or on overall program sustainability. But my S-Corps people, those people are apparently going to be the tipping point. The number one priority of our job creators is burdensome mandates, and paid family leave is one of them. They didn't say they didn't appreciate it. They didn't say they didn't value it. They said, could you please stop treating us all the same? Could you please let us have some flexibility? Could you please allow us to look at how this would work in our business, in our area, in our industry, so that we can actually do this in a way that honors our workers and honors our employees? How can we do this when you mandate everything that has to be? And as I told Representative Frazier when he asked me about removing S-Corps members, then they said, well, you know, we don't want them to get the bad idea that they are invincible. You don't have to mandate a good thing. In my bill, it doesn't say they are prohibited from joining. We never said that. We never said, please don't join this. Matter of fact, you're prohibited from doing it. We didn't say that. We said, if you find this of value, please opt in. But for those of you who do not, because you're not even allowed to use this. You're paying for this, but you can't use it. For that, we said, could you please give them a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of leeway, a little bit of wiggle room? That's what we asked for. Something more manageable. Can't do that. Because as soon as we start asking about how to make this more manageable and we use the phrase right size, the only thing we hear from the other side of the aisle is how this is going to be the domino effect. This is going to be the beginning of the end. That's not what we're asking. We're asking for maybe, since this was passed so quickly during the trifecta, this wasn't thought through in a way that honors our businesses, our job creators. We're going to have to spend, Mr. Speaker, we're going to have to spend more money correcting this now. Every little fix that we've brought here, Mr. Speaker, we now have to spend more of Minnesota taxpayers' money to fix what the other side of the aisle had decided to ram through during the trifecta. I posted something on Facebook the other day sharing about how one of my businesses is on the edge of closing. I read through one of their emails. And instead of having some sort of compassion, some sort of how can we look at this, people came out and made fun of this business owner, made fun of this job creator, a job creator who decided to take a risk, a job creator that decided to offer a way for other people to have sustainable and living wages. And rather than honoring that, they vilified that. That's how my job creators feel. They feel vilified, over-mandated, and over-regulated. And while I think this is a good slimmed-down bill for a non-budget year, those helping verbs come back. We could have done more. We should have done more. And for that, Mr. Speaker, I cannot wait for us to continue to talk about it again. Vote your conscience, members.
I recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Gottfried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if we're on the topic of discussing things that could and should have happened, I will say that we could and should have made sure that workers have some recourse if they are displaced by emerging technologies, namely AI. We are seeing more and more every day, thousands of workers being laid off across this country. And because of a recent report recently revealed that Minnesota has the #1 exposure to artificial intelligence within our workforce in the Midwest, which means that our workforce, our population, is at the highest risk of being displaced by that. Moreover, we could and should have made sure that massive corporations cannot spy on their workers through various means, whether that is electronic monitoring, embedding things into their clothes, into their bodies, subcutaneously. We could and should have made sure that massive corporations cannot fire a worker at the whim of a machine. These are all things that we could and should have done this legislative session, given the fact that the computing power of artificial intelligence doubles every 7 months. We could and should have done these things. And we will. Next year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize a member from Candy, Ojai, Representative Baker.
Thank you, members and Mr. Speaker. And again, as we wrap up House File 3732, I want to thank my co-chair. We've had a good couple years together. I will tell you this, though, that every chair of any committee will tell you that that is the best committee that there is. I say that what I love mostly about our committee, too, is not the folks that were there. We had some really great, robust discussions. A lot of times we agreed, a lot of times we didn't. But what I love about the heart and soul of what we do is about workforce. It's about the Minnesota workforce. And what makes Minnesota special has been our work integrity, the brand Minnesota has carried for decades and decades, and I'm proud that everything we do around here involves workforce. And tonight I heard a lot of comments about how do we build more houses? How do we grow more? You can't do anything without workers. So I just know that what we talk about here really does matter when it comes to policy. Representative Nadeau said it very, very well. We need to have a very stable and predictable work environment so that the folks that do risk it all and put their name on a shingle or run a company for somebody, they have to make sure that they can work within the confines to stay competitive with our neighboring states and the rest of our country and frankly the rest of the world so that we can compete like nobody else here in Minnesota. Just a couple things before I turn it over, but there's a couple things now that are coming out. Our first quarter is out. Paid family is up and running. There are some signals that we need to pay attention to. 4.5 is a number you should remember. 4.5 is the current unemployment rate in Minnesota. Over the last 14, 15 months, it has been ticking up every single month. This isn't just a short little click. But we're now 0.2% over the national average, which is not like what Minnesota has seen in the last 20 years. We have got, in some of our state agencies, we mentioned earlier, the larger employers are the ones that are seeing people leave their workforces the most right now. A lot of those already had plans in place. Currently, our largest agency in the state of Minnesota, DCT, Direct Care and Treatment, they had about 27,000 hours last month alone in March that were out on paid family medical leave. 30,000 hours. Now, if you take that on an average hour of around $35 to $45 an hour, we're talking about $1 million a month in overtime, because you just don't take people out of DC&T. You're taking care of people at Anoka Hospital, at the sex offender program in Moose Lake. It's in St. Peter. It's at my care facility in Wilmer. Those are places you just don't let the phone ring a little longer or have a couple of tables empty because you can't serve them as quickly. You got to have people there because of laws and rules, so you have mandatory overtime in place with the state government. A mid-sized county in Minnesota just reported today to me, I want to get this right, that in 2025, last year, they had 123 people out on their leave of absence or paid family leave of absence. So far in the first quarter, 133 people are out. So they've already exceeded, that middle-sized county has already more people out this year for the first 3 months than they did all of last year. So just take that and start looking at the numbers, folks. What was not baked into this and what will be facing us, whoever's coming back next year in 2027 to want to fund our government, are these new increased payroll costs coming to you courtesy of new mandates for all, no matter what, even if they had the benefits already. This should alarm you, so pay attention to this. Again, we will have more time to talk about these important issues. We have to make Minnesota more competitive. That's the bottom line. But I do like a lot of things in this bill. I hope you support the bill. We did a lot of good things with Chair Pinto that we agreed on early on, and that's to make sure that we did a better job for the future legislators that sat on this committee, to make sure that we had better guardrails, better oversight, better control of where the money is going because of the fraud that's happening here in the state of Minnesota. We don't want to let that get out of control, because there are some good things that we can do with training people to do their jobs better, to make more money, folks that are in need, folks that are at risk, people out of incarceration. We can do a lot of really good things, and this bill does that. Again, I'm not going to go through a lot of the details. It's going to be late. I want to turn it over to my co-chair, Pinto. He's got some folks that we're going to thank. But again, members, thank you so much for having this robust conversation. I'm proud of our bill. We'll get working on it. Let's get it to conference, and then we'll see what the senators are going to say. So, Mr. Speaker, I yield my time.
I recognize a member from Dakota, Representative Ray, or Anoka, Representative Ray Rower.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. I'd just like to take a minute to thank Chair Pinto and Chair Baker for including my bill, House File 4193, in this Jobs and Labor Bill. It's very important. In short, This bill is about choice, dignity, and access for those who have disabilities and want to work. On one side, there's a backlog and waiting lists on the waivered services side, while there's openings for assistance on the extended employment side for those individuals that need that. We know that if we don't do something about this problem now, it will only get worse. That's what this portion of this bill aims to fix. It restores choice for the individuals who need these services when they need the services. And it eliminates unnecessary government bureaucracy. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, I urge a green vote on this bill.
Recognize the author of the bill, the member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, thanks for the discussion about the bill. As Chair Baker said, there's some folks we want to thank. These are some workers that we feel, especially grateful to relating to the bill. First, our committee administrators, Travis Reese and Spencer Johnson. Want to thank our DFL and GOP researchers, Dave Sullivan and Indiana Smallman. Our legislative assistants, Aisha Tiamiu and Noah LaSalvia. Our pages, Kyan Corder and Riley Jones, and a special shout out to our researcher. I know members in all of our committees this year, our nonpartisan researchers have had to deal with co-chairs. Some of the co-chairs, I suspect, have been harder to deal with than others. But even those of us, Chair Baker and I think, pride ourselves on our ability to work together. But it's still challenging when you got captains pulling in different directions. Anna Cholene, who's worked with us, had that challenge. In addition, she was covering for a colleague who was out for personal reasons. And so we're grateful to her and also to Ashley Eng, our fiscal staff member as well. So a terrific team of workers pulling together this bill. We're trying to lift up and center workers as well. Members, I spoke at the beginning about this bill as being trying to make our current systems work just a little bit better. I've appreciated the collaboration with Chair Baker in doing that. I mentioned a few reforms we've put in place. I think the justification for those reforms relating to grants are maybe a little different for Chair Baker and me, but the point is we're trying to make systems work better, and I would hope that that alone would be a reason for our colleagues to support the bill. I understand some frustration about what's missing from the bill. I do want to make sure that anybody watching this is aware when we're talking about paid family medical leave, if you're thinking about those small employers, a reminder that the premiums we set for a small employer, it's about $163 per year per employee. If there's 15 employees, it's less than $2,500 per year. Now, if you're working on the margins, $2,500 can really be make or break, totally understanding that. And at the same time, that allows you to offer a benefit that large employers have been able to offer for years. I often heard from my Republican colleagues saying, well, big businesses are already offering this. That's true, they are. Small businesses weren't able to compete. This has allowed them to do so at a very, very affordable cost and to have it be that their employees, their workers, then are able to do the things that all of us as human beings want to be able to do. Have time with a baby, take care of our own illness, take care of the illness of a loved one. I mean, members, this is part of an obligation that we have as Minnesotans, and I and so many others are very proud of that, and I'm hopeful that our employers who are having some challenges with this or some concerns about this recognize right across the border in Canada, providing a year of family leave, they make it work. It works quite well. And it's something that is a thing that we really should have in all of our states, and I'm glad that ours is, I think it's the 15th state around the country. To have it. So I understand the frustration regarding what's not in the bill. I do want to caution members, though, be careful about voting based on something large that you want that's not in the bill. Folks on our side are extremely frustrated about not having the kind of support for our businesses and communities coming out of Operation Metro Surge. That is not in this bill. Members, that is not in this bill. You've noticed that. That's extremely frustrating. There's other policy areas we're very frustrated that things are not in the bill. Having said that, you need to assess the bill and what's in it. It will make matters work a little bit better. And a vote against this bill would be a vote against the Minnesotans with Disabilities and Services for Them and Extended Employment, Representative Ray Rao referenced. Against extending unemployment insurance for minors on the range, a component in this bill. Voting against a provision to make the Rural Cancer Institute work a little bit better for our greater Minnesota, our rural communities, making sure that there are oncologists who can provide care and treatment. That's all in this bill. There's a lot of stuff that's not in this bill that I think frustrates every member of this chamber for different reasons. But in a tied House, I think we can be very proud of making some progress to make programs work a little bit better. Chair Baker and I both request that you vote green on this bill, and thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The chief clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, no.
Bliss votes no. Hussein.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, aye.
Momani Hiltsley votes aye. Perez Vega. Perez Vega.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 98 yeas and 35 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.